The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. This is part 3 in a trilogy about Virgil. He also went by Virgilio. And his cousin Arturo. I mentioned in the earlier 2 podcasts in this trilogy, the basics of his story. Virgil was a young man. He was probably under 25 years old. He was followed by someone at night on a street. He was followed in a way that seemed menacing, but he didn't want to give it away that he was going to break into a run. He just tried to play it cool, but the person did have ill intentions toward him, accosted him, and killed him with something that was handy, something that was just in the street. He told us that the guy was probably on drugs and didn't know him. It was a random act. He left his body pretty quickly. He wasn't really angry about having been murdered. That is, he wasn't angry at the person who did this to him. He knew enough people who had addiction issues that he had empathy. He had compassion for the person who did this because he just said this just looked like somebody that had no control over his faculties at all. That was a locked-in addiction. He also told us that in his adaptation to his afterlife, people were helping him in the early days after his death. And he was stuck, if you will, but by the thought that his life ended in what he called a stupidity. That the way that his life ended was a stupidity, and it tempted him towards believing that his life, or maybe life in general, is pointless. So that made him sad. He kept returning to that thought as though it were an unalterable truth. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in this episode. The wisdom of checking our work, of going back to some presuppositions that we hold, and sometimes the longer we've held them, the more true we believe they are. It can just be what one author once called falsehood grown old. The fact that something has been around a long time doesn't make it venerable, it just makes it old. And in the case of Virgil, he had this idea that he was just not ready to turn loose of, that his life was pointless because it ended in a stupidity, and he was sad. Whereupon his guardian angel, he told us, asked him, "Do you want to be sad for all eternity? Because it's you who are making yourself sad. You're believing an untruth that your life is pointless. Would you be willing to think differently? Or would you just like to be eternally sad?" Well, Virgil said, "Well, nobody's ever put it to me quite that way, but no, thank you. I would not like to be eternally sad." His guardian said, "Well, you do see the chain, the linkage, do you not? You have this thought, it produces this emotion, and you stay in that emotion." He could have gone further and said, sometimes when you stay in sad emotions, the behavior that comes out of you makes matters even worse. He didn't really go there. But anyway, that was one of the things that Virgil had to tell us about himself that I thought could be instructive and maybe even helpful to any of you in this listening and viewing audience. Well, in the way that we structure these podcasts, we first tell a story that's from one of the 3 books, mostly. This one is from book 2 in the Afterlife Interrupted series. Recently, I've begun telling stories that are not in print. Maybe they will be later, but anyway, this one was in book 2. he told us that we always have the initial conversation with a person when we're in prayer and we're helping them move from an afterlife plane or level that's primarily therapeutic because they died in a violent way and need therapeutic help. But once they've healed sufficiently, we help them move from point to point, from this, we're kind of like the discharge staff at a medical center, helping them out the door. We often ask them, do you know who you'd like to have come for you to be a guide because you're going to be going somewhere that you haven't been before? And in his case, Virgilio said, absolutely, it would be my cousin Arturo. Well, we learned that both of them had grown up in poverty, but Arturo looked around and found resources through a community college and a program that specifically was instructing people how to run some medical equipment. So he would work alongside healthcare professionals running some sort of a machine. He did that and then died suddenly in a car crash. So his cousin Virgil had gone to the funeral expecting it to be sort of the usual suspects of family funerals, mostly family members, a few neighborhood friends, and that's about it. But instead, he discovered that Arturo, by building the career that he did in this healing work, now had a whole cadre of friends and associates that were not within the family network, and they had an extraordinary respect for their friend. He said the funeral was so surprising because there were all these people who were strangers to me talking about my cousin as as though he were a hero, and uh, they really admired him. So he said, that's the person I'd like to have come for me. And when he did, Arturo showed up. This was happening in the early stages of our COVID epidemic at the time that ventilators were in the news all the time. If you don't remember that, um, there was a time when people were dying before there were vaccines, and uh, they were the media kept saying we need more ventilators because people were not able to breathe on their own and they needed the support of ventilators, but there weren't enough of them to go around. So when Arturo showed up, he showed up in medical scrubs. He went to work wearing scrubs, and he showed up in his afterlife introduction against a background of ventilators to kind of visually bring home the point that there are not shortage or scarcity here. There's a superabundance of anything that's needed. Well, they did go on together, and in the story and in the previous up two podcasts, I recalled to the listener, the viewer, that immediately Arturo said there's work to be done here because the earth is sending us many more people than it normally does because of this pandemic. And there's a lot of people dying from it. Some of them get so feverish and ill that they get sleepy and even go unconscious and die that way, or while they're unconscious. But he said others die gasping for their last breath. And when they arrive here, they're still gasping because they think they need to. And it's the most kind thing we can do for them to let them know that uh, we've got a mask for them or a ventilator for them, and then we ease them off of it and help them see that they don't really need that any longer. But he said to his cousin, to Virgil, stay right here with me and help, would you? We need, it's kind of all hands on deck. And there were, even though Virgil wasn't trained in healthcare, there were apparently tasks that could be done by any willing volunteer. And Virgil just pitched in. He ended up telling us that he had never really worked as a part of a team like that before. And even though he was just doing whatever practical thing they asked him to do, he really enjoyed the camaraderie. And he thought that going forward in his afterlife, he might like to explore possibilities of service that involve teamwork. So that's where we start today. This episode is called Spiritual Practice. So I'm looking at the story of Virgil and cousin Arturo with regard to a spiritual practice that might emerge from it. There are two actually that I want to focus on. The first one is how can one, with some sort of spiritual practice, move out of some certitude in one's thinking that makes a person unhappy and keeps them unhappy? That was really Virgil's problem. This idea that because his life had ended violently as it did, that in a stupidity, that his life was pointless. Well, that's a dramatic story. That's an interpretation of an event. It's not the event itself. The event itself was that he was walking down the street, someone pursued him, accosted him, and hit him with some object and killed him. Those are the bare facts, the data. That's what occurred. Virgil, uh, when he recalled that event, he brought with him interpretations of the event that didn't serve him well, that made him unhappy and continued to make him unhappy. For a while, he just decided that, see, this is proof that if you can die because of a stupidity, your life must be pointless. Do you get that? There's a two-step thing going on here. One is the data itself. Second is an interpretive story that one tells about the data, and that moves towards a third thing, which is ongoing unhappiness because of the emotions that that dramatic story arouses. And in Virgil's case, it was a closed loop. Uh, Thinking of the event, interpreting it as he did, feeling as he did, he could just be in that loop and continue to stay there and be unhappy. And his guardian just said, well, do you want to be internally unhappy because you're the one that keeps doing this same thing again and again? I've been taught to look at dramatic stories that I tell myself that make me unhappy and uh, try to, in prayer, ask the Holy Spirit to help me see things from a different point of view. First off, to recognize that you're even doing that is important, that moving from the event to the interpretive story already is a movement. And are there other possible movements? Are there other possible stories, other possible ways I could think about that event rather than thinking this way that I'm used to thinking is the only way that I can think? We can be hard on ourselves, or we can just forget that we have imaginations and that we could imagine a different way of thinking about a thing that might help promote future growth. Well, um, when I get in a thought loop like that, where I'm unhappy, sometimes it moves towards some version of nobody loves me, nobody cares. Uh, the thing that happened is proof that I'm not valued, um, that I'm not as important as, uh, all that kind of thing that reduces a person's full humanity to some shriveled up, unhappy version of it. And I think I haven't been killed in a accosted in the street like Virgil has, but I believe that he and I are kindred spirits, and that we've had unhappy life events, which we then told an interpretive story about that only made us even more unhappy. So how do you break that cycle of believing one's own dramatic story? First off, I think it's can you just ask yourself, am I in charge of me or not? Do I believe that I've been given a life that I'm free to do with as I please? I believe that's true. Uh, Even when there have been times when I was constrained and not that free. Remember, I've taken a vow of obedience. There have been times when a religious superior says, Nathan, I want you to pack your things and move from here to there tomorrow because I need you over there. It's usually not tomorrow, but it's in the next few months. But there have been times when I was asked uh, under obedience to go to a place and do a thing I didn't want to do. And you can begin to feel like, I'm uh, unimportant or unloved or underappreciated or something like that if you want, but then you'll just be unhappy. So, are you in charge of your happiness or not? I remember having some counseling help in my 20s, and I was pretty much asked that question by a counselor. Uh, do you want to continue to tell yourself the story that you're telling me, which always makes you unhappy, or would you be willing to think of it in a different way? So, well, I was paying the man to to be my counselor, so I could have just fought him and said, "No, there really is no option here. I'm absolutely right in my convictions, and this situation sucks." Well, um, it takes a little humility to push against sadness, persistent sadness, and say, "Wait a minute, there are other ways to be. There are other ways that I could think." So. One of the things that I learned along the way was in my own spiritual practice, like when I pray, when in scripture, it says, Jesus says, go to your room and close the door and speak to your heavenly Father in secret. So when I'm all alone, in secret at prayer, I've learned to not think of myself as the only one in the room. Um, if you're looking at this podcast, there's a picture of an angel over here. There's the cover of my first book with the Toto dog on it. There's a couple of pictures of Jesus on the wall behind me. One of the things I do sometimes is I want to remind myself of the truth that I was created out of love. I'm made of love. I'm here to love. I'm just surrounded in love, even if I'm lonely, lonesome, and that I'm loved and valued whether I think I am or not, that it's just a fact of the universe. You get that? I'm a loved being because I came from love. I'm made of love. I'm here to love. I'm just loved and there's no escaping it. I'm a loved person. Well then, but if I'm all alone and maybe if I've just moved away from a whole network of people that I was friends with, I've done that a number of times. I might have to bring them into my imagination and remember that I'm loved by all kinds of people, some who are living upon the earth, some might be far away now. There are some that lived in other times and places. There are some that lived in my lifetime who have died. I'm loved in lots of different ways by lots of different people. So I'm doing a few little visual aids here today. I'm going to start with Jesus because he is my beloved. And I have this picture of him on my wall of my bedroom so that when I wake up, it's across the room from me, but it's the first thing I see in the morning. I'm reminded that he's with me always. He is the friend of all friends, and that he can hear me when I speak. I can allow him in my heart and feel my emotions with me and maybe bring some brightness. Let's see, who else do we have? I think I'll go with this one. This is, again, I know some of you are listening. I'll try to be descriptive. I'm holding up an oval photograph of my parents. It's one of those for people who are church members. Oftentimes, there are these photographic companies that come to churches and create a pictorial directory of all the members in the church. It helps you to be able to call people by name when you see them at church. Well, this was my mom and dad before my dad was very deep into his Parkinson's disease he had for the last 10 years of his life. So they're in their probably early 70s, maybe about the age that I am, in late 60s. Um, but I know that they love me. They each have passed on, but I talk to them in prayer. And I don't need to have like messages or anything like that, or, all those little paranormal things of music and signs of different kinds. I just call on them and say, hello, would you come and be with me? I know that you love me. I'm looking forward to being with you again when it's time for that. I try to think of it as like uh, a tea bag and the way that you see if, especially in a clear glass container, when you put the tea in, you can begin to watch it diffuse and the flavor of the tea moves all through the water. I try to think of myself as I might be cold and dark right now, but when I allow my imagination to land on, and so far, Jesus and my mom and dad, I begin to warm. And I invite their presence, not only through my imagination, but I ask for their being, for their essence, for their energy to be in the room with me. Um, I have, let's see, where will I go next? Well, maybe a couple of saint things. I'm a Dominican, and this is Saint Dominic. This is a little oil on canvas. It's a tiny little bit of canvas, and it was never framed, as far as I know. Um, it's I don't know, maybe about 5 inches by 3.5, something like that. It's not large. It's just a depiction of Saint Dominic that my grandmother did in oils, probably back in the late 30s. That was when she was prolific doing a lot of oil painting. Dominic he lived in the 11, late 11 and early 1200s, but as you know, everybody that died is still alive. And if you if you invite them to be actively a part of your life, they will begin to do that. And so Dominic is my great he's I call him Holy Father Dominic in our order. He's the founder, but he also is my friend. Um, well, I don't want to leave out Mother Mary. She's over here. I'm holding up now a statue of her that's probably about 8 or 9 inches tall. It's ceramic, and it was one that my grandmother made. My grandmother was a ceramicist. She was an artist of lots of different kinds, but she did this one, and it has some delicate like flowers at the bottom of it that she painted and all that. I have different images of Mary, but that one I like because it has the family story in it too. So I asked her to come and be with me, and if I'm focusing on sadness in this particular moment because that was what Virgil brought. He said he was sad, and his guardian had to say to him, "Well, do you want to be eternally sad?" So this is kind of a tonic that I use to move out of sadness, is to fill my heart with love of people that I know love me, wherever they are and however they are. Um, One other is this is my friend Barbara. She is one of my dearest friends, but this was given to me at her funeral. She died a sudden death uh, now 15 years ago. And she didn't like to have her photo taken. So I have only this one photo of her that she probably would hate because she hated every picture of herself. But uh, I know that she loved me through and through. And we lived together, or at least in the same community, for a few years. And then I moved away. But even then, I knew of her love at a distance. And so I now, can pray confidently that Barbara will be with me when I call. And then just so you know that not everybody that I love has died. Here's a picture of my lifelong friend, Father Richard, and I together. I don't know what we were doing. We were at some public event. I'm looking in the background, and that we were at some church thing probably. And anyway, we've been friends for 45 years now. So I've been blessed to have a lifelong friend who has been, well, we haven't lived in the same place many of those years. So sometimes that relationship was conducted over the phone or, before the internet and email, letters or whatever. But now we're living in the same city, so we see each other pretty frequently. But in all these cases, I bring images of people and allow my emotions, my heart to absorb the reality that I'm loved, and that my present moment is full of love. My future will be full of love. Even if unhappy things happen in the future, they will happen to me as a loved person. And that's important to me. So I would just recommend that as a possible spiritual practice for you, whether having little visual aids like photos and statuary and stuff is helpful to you or not. You can do it in your own imagination without these objects. But just remember, there are people who indeed have loved you uh, and do love you. And uh, love has a way of energizing me, at least, and it can give me kind of a higher frequency of thought. I don't have to go to sad, depressing thoughts by default, as though I have no say in the matter. Love can lift me up and help me to think a different thought. I might even have an internal dialogue with myself that says, I know that you're used to thinking this way, Nathan, and there's certain substance to that. I understand the way that that thought moves. Nevertheless, it is true that it makes you sad. And when you stay sad, you're not nearly as useful to other people as you would be if you were energized. That's important, and it's going to be the kind of the bridge to the second part of this podcast. What happened in Virgil's story when he did move up or cross or ascend or whatever you want to call it with his cousin Arturo. Arturo didn't feel free in the moment to take him on a guided tour or to some spa or something. He was busy. He was busy with afterlife healthcare because of the pandemic, and he just said to Virgil, "Here, here, help, stay here and help." And so Virgil was not a person who was very acquainted with healthcare, but apparently there were tasks around that needed doing. He didn't go into what they were, but he just said it was kind of an all hands on deck moment. And there were jobs tasks that he could perform that were helpful. And before long, he was up and out of himself and not just thinking about his own woes because he was at the service of other people and working alongside other people who were um, admirable. Were people who were compassionate and competent and willing to spend their time and energy helping other people. And even though Virgil, didn't have a healthcare background, he got in there and did what he could. And he later reflected on it and said, I didn't really belong to any kind of team like that, and there was a camaraderie in it that was beautiful that I think I'd like to experience more of. So he was going to explore in his next part of his afterlife, what can I do that would be of service that would put me in the company of teammates that I haven't yet met. Well, that's what I want to recommend as a possible spiritual practice for you, especially if you've been through a period of sadness or an event that saddens you repeatedly, the possibility that you allow in new people and allow in new experiences by testing the waters of service, making yourself be of service to somebody. Virgil could have said, "What the hell do I know about healthcare? I'd be perfectly useless here." But his cousin just said, "Here, do this." And because I've worked in the nonprofit sector, running churches mostly or campus ministry centers and working alongside social service providers of all different kinds, um, this is just true. There might be, whatever the mission is, there might be a few people that need to be very skilled and proficient in technicalities of whatever the project is. But lots of times there are just the need for willing bodies. I can remember I used to work at Stanford as the campus pastor there for the Catholic community for 7 years, and we had the entire week of Thanksgiving off. So from the Friday before Thanksgiving all the way to the following Monday, we had all that time off. And so we had a service project that we did. We flew from the San Francisco Bay Area down to Las Vegas, where another Dominican brother of mine uh, ran a program that was called the St. Rose Center, and it was established for people with HIV and AIDS. Uh, when it was established, most people died of AIDS. As uh, the medicines improved and the illness was better understood, it began to be that people didn't die necessarily of it, but they were impoverished by it because of the high cost of medical care. And very often they were having struggles with keeping the rent paid or groceries and stuff. They had formed a community where people got together and pooled whatever they had and helped each other through it. One of the things that they had, like a sort of a clothing exchange, um, lots of other household goods that they would kind of create a common uh, storehouse of different objects that you might be able to just go and borrow or even take home because it was unneeded. Somebody donated it. But one of the things that they did was create a lot of food baskets, and they did a lot of gleaning. Are you familiar with that word? Uh, Especially of grocery stores or food places that might be about to discard something. If only somebody there were to rescue it, it might be put to some use. So they had agreements, and they bought trucks. They raised money, and they had all this infrastructure, especially at Thanksgiving, to create these huge food baskets, 400 of them. Well, it took a lot of labor because a truck would back up and there would be like 50-pound bags of onions. And somebody had to unload that, put it somewhere, and then open it up. And somebody was, people told you what to do. Like, here, Nathan, put two onions in each of these 400 baskets. And so it was simple task, but you were just doing it alongside other people. And very often in that place, it was these poor folks with HIV and AIDS that were I don't know, like the managers of the whole thing. And they were telling you how to, do your job. So all you did was do what you were told. We did that for years. We'd go for like 2 or 3 days at a time and create all these baskets. And there was great camaraderie. And then at the end of the workday, we would have some sort of social where we would hear the story of some of the people we'd been working with throughout the day, and uh, what this place meant to them. So there was a lot, and we were the students that we brought along. We usually brought about, at maybe 7 or 8 students. Those students didn't necessarily know each other all that well. They just signed up for the same service project. But very often friendships evolve out of that kind of thing. So I would recommend the practice of if you feel like you're in a recurring loop of telling a sad story, listen to uh, that the guardian angel that Virgil mentioned, asking, "Do you want to stay eternally unhappy, or could we just take a break? Could we just do something a little bit different?" Because I've been around churches and have run them, and we usually have announcements at the end of the service, and most of the time the announcements pertain to some service opportunity. Many of them are short term, where you could try something out. This week we're going to be making sandwiches, or we're going to be doing something. Could you come and help? If so, come at 10. There might be some low pressure, uh, non-committal things where you just show up and help. There are other things that, of course, involve more commitment and maybe some training. Uh, but those can be moved into incrementally. You don't have to dive into the deep end of volunteerism necessarily. You could just go and get started somewhere. I think it's good to remember that it's in volunteering to serve others, it's good to keep the others in the forefront. I'm suggesting this as a spiritual practice to move through trauma and sadness, but I wouldn't recommend go here so that you'll feel better. Uh, that's selfish, or at least it has a selfishness about it, in my opinion. It's better to just say, I think I'd like to try this service where kind people are doing a good thing, and see what this is like, just to explore it. Um, and at least it gives you some reason to get up and get out and move about, meet some new people. One cautionary thing would be sometimes I was dealing a lot in much of my career with 18 to 25-year-olds, and some of them hadn't really been involved in voluntary organizations. They'd just been in school or maybe sports or something. And sometimes when there were opportunities to be a part of a team, they leapt at it because they had some really positive experience, and it looks like this is just going to be loads of fun. I want to be on the service team, and we're going to be a part of. I get the T-shirt, and I'll be a part of the group. Well, sometimes uh, these kind of things involve interdependence, depending upon other people to do a thing. You might have said at the previous meeting that I will bring the uh, sodas to the pizza party. and then let people down by saying the night before, oh, sorry, I got a test. I can't do the thing I said I'd do. And then somebody has to scramble to do it because you dropped the ball. Sometimes I'd see people that would begin doing some volunteerism, and then when it became not fun, the they walked away from it. So I just caution you that if you're looking for a service opportunity and there's the possibility that there could be enjoyment in it, which was what Virgil found, um, don't demand it. Be grateful for it if it is there, and if it isn't, so what? If you performed a service, that's good and all by itself, but don't necessarily make service projects or service at all self-serving of you. Uh, if you keep a heart focused on serving other people, I think it all comes out well in the end. So I'd I would recommend that if this story is landing in you and you and it feels like it might be time for a new thought that might lead to a better tomorrow, look for these two possible things. One of them is some spiritual practice where you sit still and allow people who you know love you to flood your imagination one way or another and warm you, let you know that you're loved, even though this might be a difficult time. I think that's well worth doing. And if you do that well, you might find that when you get up and leave the room and go out to whatever it is you do next, you might do it with a little bit of spring in your step, or at least you might be somebody that others are happy to see more than they would have been had you not done that. And then the second is look for something to do that's within arm's reach and don't talk yourself out of it. Just do a few things, small things. And one thing can lead to another. And if you're leadable, if you ask what I call the Holy Spirit, would you guide me in the direction of a really good uh, place for me where my gifts would be well used and where I would be a good fit? I think that'll happen. Anyway, that's what I got for you today. This is the spiritual practice part of the three-part trilogy of Virgil and cousin Arturo. That's chapter 8 of book 2 of the Afterlife Interrupted series. As always, if you have a question that you think you'd like to pose to me or would like to be in touch somehow, you can do that through my website, which is nathan-castle.com. I ask that if you have questions about the practice, the spiritual practice, or of helping souls cross, and have questions about the spirit contact and the dreams and all of that, please read at least one of the books first before wanting to speak about that. I find that if people are a little bit better informed, sometimes people just hear one podcast and then say, "Oh, I'm going to talk to this guy." Well, I just would like it if you read one of the books because then our conversation would be that much richer. And remember too that I pray for you daily. Um, and when I do, I pray for that part of you that might have been wounded in some way, that healing might find its way to you as it does to all the people that move through this process, and that like Arturo and Virgil, that you might have good companionship and bright futures. Anyway, that's it for now. God bless you. Bye now.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.